I'm going to show you how I made this buttercream pumpkin cake. I start off by baking 2 layers of cake in half ball pans and then a 6-inch cake for the center, and then I stack and fill those using my raspberry Swiss meringue buttercream, and then I cover with vanilla Swiss meringue buttercream. At this point my cakes are very chilled, and I use a knife to score lines down the side and then carve it into a basic pumpkin shape. Once I'm happy with my shape, I put on a thin layer of buttercream for a crumb coat, and then I pop my cake into the fridge for about 10 minutes to chill before I put my final coat on. I use a flexi smoother to smooth out my buttercream. These are typically used for fondant covered cakes, but I think they work really well for any cakes that have a curve or carved cakes. It just helps you get in all the cracks because they're flexible and you can bend them. And acetate also works if you don't have a flexi smoother. Just cut it into the shape you need, and you can also bend and smooth with that as well. At this point I chill my cake and then use a dowel to pick it up and put it on my finished board, and then I go through and smooth it once it's really nice and chilled, which makes it a lot easier to smooth the buttercream out. I ended up scraping it a little bit too much. I should have done a slightly thicker layer of buttercream. Usually I would go through and do a second coat, but I'm going to be painting this one, so it didn't matter that there was a little bit of cake showing through. Using a gloved hand, I give it one quick last smooth over before switching to this loop tool to make these grooves in the side like a real pumpkin has. And then I mix white food coloring with vodka, and as I'm spinning this around I give it 4 or 5 coats. You don't really want it to dry in between, just make sure you keep going up and down until it starts to dry so you get a nice even coverage. And once you're all done and it's all set, it should look like this. This was the best clip I have of me piping a flower, which is not great, but I really struggled trying to keep it in view of the camera. Here I went and just added some little vines and leaves with a number 2 piping tip, and then I just used a tiny leaf tip. I can't remember the number, but it's just a teeny tiny leaf tip to add little leaves all over the vines that I piped. I added these larger leaves around the bottom that I had piped on parchment paper and popped in the freezer. I find it easier to just add some of my leaves and then add my flowers and then kind of fill in the gaps where I want more leaves once the flowers are added. I went to put the flower on and I realized that this top mound that I had of cake was just too tall, so I popped that all off and then added a smaller mound, which still ended up being too much, and my flowers were just not gonna stick, so I added just a tiny bit of cake and mostly buttercream, so I had that little edge for my flowers to hang on so that they don't fall off the side of the cake. You want to work pretty quick, especially if you're piping your flowers with Korean piping tips, because the petals are very thin and they break very easy. So you want them to be super chilled. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to fit them all around, but I just barely squeezed this last flower in. I always use a toothpick when I'm adding this style flower on. It just makes it a lot easier. You can pop it off and then just pipe in your center to fill in that little hole that the toothpick made. Once I have all my big flowers on, I just add leaves to fill in the gaps, and then I pipe in my filler flowers. This is one of my favorite filler flowers to pipe. You just use a number 3 tip, and then you pipe the green center, and then you go around with a teeny tiny star tip with your white buttercream, and I think they just look so cute. I wanted to add a little height, so I used some spaghetti. You could also use floral wire, and then I went around with a tiny star tip with some white buttercream, and I thought it kind of looked like pampas grass. Shortly after this, my camera died and I didn't realize it, so I didn't get to record me adding these flowers along the bottom. This is my finished cake though. Let me know what you think. Also, if you make your own buttercream pumpkin cakes, I'd love if you could tag me so I can see them too. Thanks for watching.